Welcome to the Library Lived In. I'm Anise, and this is my co-host.
Lisa, hello.
And this month we read a book by Diana Wynne Jones called Hexwood. And it was probably the craziest book I have ever read. I guess we'll start out with rating. At first I said I was going to give it 4 stars because when I finished, I immediately went back through the book and flipped through to see if, when I got to the end, I realized that there were a bunch of clues throughout the book that didn't make sense until the end of the book. So I had to go back and check and see if I was right about some of those. But anyway, so I changed my rating to 3.5 stars.
Oh.
So how many stars do you give it, Lisa?
I'm going to go with 4. And I haven't gone back through, but I know I will. I'll have to read this one again, and I'll have to look at all the things, all the foreshadowing. Yeah. Because there was so much of it that I knew was going on, but I couldn't quite put my finger on. Mm-hmm. And it really came together. So, yeah, I'm going to give it a good 4.
Show me, can I see what cover your book has? Oh, so yours has the good cover. Mine has like a really creepy, weird cover.
What's yours? Let's see yours. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So, okay, so basically the first 100 pages of this book, which is like 370 or 390 pages, something like that. The first 100 pages, I felt pretty oblivious. I had no idea what was happening. It was confusing, and I was really glad that all of a sudden after that, things started connecting and making sense because I was a little worried.
Yes. I think our page counts are different. I have like 430 some or something like that.
Well, this one is bigger.
Yeah.
Actually, how many pages it has. It's 295, this one is.
Well, see, you never know. I felt like, yeah, somewhere around 150, 200 pages. I was like, and it's all coming together now. Where before that, there's enough going on to keep you interested, but it's really sort of, I don't know if disjointed is the right word, but it's a little, you don't know exactly what's going on and you kind of hop around a lot.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was really great when it finally started coming together and you could piece things together.
Yeah, and so some things that happen in this book. So parts of this book reminded me of Doctor Who, just the combination of things, and parts of it reminded me of Fringe, which is a great TV show. And there were parts that reminded me of 2001: A Space Odyssey, and just all kinds of different things I could see, all these different influences. So in this book, there are intergalactic federations, evil experiments, magic, dragons, knights in shining armor, time travel, robots, and all kinds of other stuff. So that gives some idea of the craziness.
Yes. As far as the Doctor Who thing too, you have sort of there's a time shift going on, the way that Doctor Who kind of pops in and out of random times all the time. I kind of felt a little bit of that as well.
Yeah. So I wrote a summary, and it's as short as I can make it. So I'll go through the summary, and then I guess I'm not sure if it'll be better to talk about characters or plot, so we'll just see how it goes. So 5 reigners are the rulers of the universe in the House of Balance on a planet called Homeworld in another galaxy. They have a machine called a Banus stored on Hexwood Farm on planet Earth for safekeeping. And the Banus is a sort of probability machine that runs every possibility of whatever scenario you present it with inside a timeless theta space field that it creates. It prefers to use living people for its scenarios, but it will also create people if needed. The machine is inadvertently switched on, and the reigners send people to turn it off, but they all keep disappearing. So next section, a 12-year-old girl named Anne, who sometimes hears voices in her head, has seen people entering Hexwood Farm, but never coming out. She explores the wood that borders the farm and finds a sorcerer named Mordion trapped inside a capsule, which he says he's been in for centuries. She tries to run away and scrapes her knee, leaving some blood on the ground. Mordion asks if he can use her blood for a spell to create a hero who can defeat the Reigners, which Mordion cannot do because of a ban the Reigners placed on him, because he's their servant, sort of assassin who takes care of enemies and expendables. She agrees, and adding some of his own blood, he creates a boy around the age of 10 who is called Hume. Mordion refuses to care for the child, and so Anne requests a caretaker for the boy, which the Banus provides in the form of Yam, the robot, because the Banus sometimes grants wishes. Anne leaves the forest, and the next thing we know is in the forest again with Hume, age 5. It seems as though they are familiar and well known to each other, and Mordion is caring for the boy after all. As she leaves the forest, Anne realizes that it is the same day she scraped her knee and that she had only entered the forest once. And so I think that's the first part that was like, I had to like keep going back between the pages, and I was like, I don't know what's happening.
Yes, this is the first time you get the idea that there's a time discrepancy, and that somehow there's a certain amount of memory that they get to keep while not being able to understand why the time is changing the way that it is.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the Reigners begin to take matters into their own hands, and they come one by one to try and turn the machine off, which is done by taking hold of whatever the Banus is manifesting itself as, usually a chalice, magic sword, or something like that. Each gets sucked into the Banus's theta space and begins thinking they are someone else. After the first 3 Reigners don't return, the final 2 Reigners come to Earth and bring a 21-year-old woman named Viren with them, who works in a lowly position at the House of Balance and whose family is secretly planning a rebellion against the Reigners. And in case I didn't say, spoiler alert. So
Yeah.
anybody who doesn't want spoilers, stop watching now. As Viren gets nearer to Hexwood Farm, we realize that she hears voices too. It becomes clear that she is actually Anne and has been in the Banus field for longer than she thought. The village is ransacked by a roving group of knights that emerge from the Banus field, and it is hinted that Anne's family is actually Viren's family, who have been planning to overthrow the Reigners. They were captured and transported to Earth after she left on her journey with the last 2 Reigners. Hearing voices is revealed to be a trait that all Reigners share. All the characters congregate to a part of the theta space that takes the form of a medieval castle, with everyone believing most of the time that they are knights and ladies under the rule of a sickly king. Raynor, too, believes she is called Morgan Latray and engaged to the king. She asks the Banus for poison to use in her evil scheme for power. She receives it and uses it on Mordion, who becomes a dragon. Raynor 1 also becomes a dragon. There's a battle, and the Reigners are all slain. Mordion has realized that Yam the robot is the manifestation of the Banus. He catches it, and afterwards the survivors meet up in the woods, and all becomes clear. The Banis was actually built to select new reigners every 10 years by running scenarios to test the best potential candidates' suitability. 1,000 years ago, Rainer 1 manipulated the machine and hid it away so that he could remain in power. The characters realize who they truly are. Hume is Martellian Pender, aka Merlin. Sir Artegall is Arthur Pendragon. Mordion and Viren are themselves from Homeworld. Anne's brother, Martin, is Fitela Wolfson, a descendant of Merlin, who is featured in Beowulf and the Poetic Edda. These 5 recognize that the voices they've all been hearing their whole lives have been each other, speaking from different times and places. The 5 characters previously mentioned become the new Hand of Reigners. All the while, the Banis has had to contend with the theta field that Hexwood creates, and the forest refuses to let anyone leave its boundaries at this point unless they work together to create a permanent theta space for it to become the Great Forest permanently, whereas up till now it can only become the Great Forest when a human enters it. Mordion and the others work together to use a spell that will allow this, and upon completing the task, they are released and depart Earth to fill their new positions as reigners.
Deep breath. I just add to that Hume, who is Arthur, and
So Hume is Merlin.
I mixed them up. And Sir Artegall. Okay, so the 2 of them used to be reigners way back in the day.
Yes, I think so.
1,000 years ago, and they were deposed by the 5 reigners that we have at the beginning of the book.
Right.
and that the Banis was then used to lock them up.
Yes, they were put. So let's see, I wrote this down somewhere. So Rainer 1 is like the bad guy in this story. Rainer 1, his real name is Orm Pender, which if you notice, Hume / Merlin / Martellian Pender, I think they were brothers. Even though it doesn't say it outright, but I'm pretty sure. And so Orm Pender must have been selected as one of the new reigners, and then he wanted to stay in charge, so he took the Banis and put seals on it and locked it away, and he took the old reigners, some of which were Merlin and Arthur, and locked them away in like deep freeze for hundreds of years. And so nobody else knew what the Banis was supposed to do, that it was supposed to select new reigners. They just thought it was a decision-making machine. And that's what he wanted everyone to think.
Yeah. And the delightful bit that the machine getting accidentally turned on was by, you say it was a controller, was his position over Hexwood Farms. He wasn't supposed to know what it was or what was going on. He turned it on in order to create a role-playing game. I just wanted a role-playing game.
Yeah.
And it got much bigger than he was prepared for.
Yeah, and that's because of the big twist.
Yeah.
Which I don't know, do we want to talk about plot and storyline first?
Yes, let's.
Or just, okay. So the plot twist is, that the whole time everyone is going into this forest, and that's where everything crazy is happening. And so you think that the Banis field is only as big as the forest. And then it turns out at the end, when Orm Pender is dying, the Banis comes over, and this is what the Banis says. I waited those 1,000 years until someone with sufficient Rainer blood was near enough to restore me my full power. I knew this was a statistical probability. As soon as your seals were removed, I spread my field along every communication line and through every portal to the House of Balance, and I brought you here to die. I want you to know that every one of my 697 plans of action was designed to end in your death, and your death now comes. So you find out that the Banis field stretched like all the way into this other universe. And then you just have so many questions because you don't know this whole book that you've been reading. How many plans is this? Is this just like the final successful plan, or are you seeing parts of different plans and that's why it's disjointed?
Right. Right. Well, and the fact that it does sort of explain itself, the Banis, to Mordion a little bit, and you get that this is something that it has been slowly thinking and plotting for some time before it was even switched on. It's as he was still thinking in a dormant state, even though it couldn't do anything at that point in time, it could still be thinking and plotting and, scheming. That's a long time, to arrange that. And so he put through all of these scenarios in a way that only sort of a computer could do, the probability and figuring all of those things out. Mm-hmm. So, and it has the ability to test each of their natures so that it can know, I guess for the sake of the bringing out the best Rainers, but for the sake of the book, it's great because it brings you to know really the truth of each character.
Mm-hmm. That's true. And I did like that when the Banis was announcing who the new Rainers were, they were all just as surprised as the reader was, I think.
Yeah.
And I liked that the Banis told them when they were surprised, it was like, well, to Viren, he says that she qualifies to be a Rainer because she's not easily deceived. And to Mordion, he said his strength of will. For the others, it was their previous experience as Rainers. And then for Martin / Fatella, it was so he could learn some responsibility, which I thought was funny.
And also he was suggested by Martellin too, right? Martellin told the Banis, this is who I think you should make the Rainer. So it kind of took that into account as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and they all had their reactions, which I thought was really funny. Wasn't it Martellin who said, no, not again. Like, I've already done this. I need to do it again.
Yeah.
So it was good. It was good. Go ahead.
So while we're talking about Martellian / Hume, what did you think about like the whole thing with his eye?
I think that's one of those things that if I had been more familiar with Arthurian legend, would have cued into quicker, Yeah. But I've only done a certain bit of reading on that, like research reading, and I haven't done any direct reading on any of the legends. And so I didn't get it till the end. I didn't get it till it was explained at the end.
Yeah, but I was kind of like so what happens in the story is at certain points, Mordion is trying to heal Hume's eye because for some reason his eye is like irritated and is having problems. And then it turns out at the end that Merlin only has one eye. So I hadn't ever read that in anything that I've read in connection with Arthurian legend. So I'm not sure if that actually has a source somewhere or if that was something that she just like her own spin on it.
Well, it explains that it had come from a dragon attack like years before.
Mhm.
right there at the end. And so maybe it was part of her invention, because part of the discussion is in the book is that dragons were brought from another planet somewhere else to the Earth in part of the battles for control in the earlier days, and that's how that happened. And so it could just be part of that.
That's true. And the Banis did say too, when he was telling them about how Orm Pender had manipulated it, he said it was partially because Orm's mother was a witch from Lind, the same planet where the dragons came from. And so that was probably a clue when it was mentioned earlier, I think. But I don't know. There's so many, it is really hard to figure it all out.
Yeah. Definitely a lot. So where was your, I guess I'll ask that later. Go ahead.
Ask.
You're going to reply. I was just, when did you cue in the first time on the Arthurian connection?
I had read in a review that somebody left, they said something about Arthurian legend, so I kind of had it in the back of my mind. But it is also mentioned at the very beginning of the book, like in one of the very first pages, whoever accidentally switched on the machine was trying to do like a fantasy football team with King Arthur and Napoleon and Caesar, and so it like listed all these people, and so I was like, okay, maybe these people will show up later in the story.
I just didn't even catch that.
I
remember it.
On like the first page. It was in the very.
No, you're right. I just didn't I don't know. I just didn't put that much thought into it, I guess.
So through the whole story, I was like positive. I thought Mordion was Merlin. I guess just because he was a sorcerer, and so I was like, he has to be Merlin. But then I got to the end, and he was just himself, and like I think he was the only one. He didn't tell everybody that he was the Rainer's servant, but he knew who he was through the whole story. Viren thought that she was a 12-year-old girl for a lot of the story, which I thought was suspicious because even from the beginning, it didn't say at first how old she was, but I thought that she seemed older than she was. What did you think when you were reading about her?
I wasn't suspicious of her age until she finally mentioned what age she was. Like 2/3, 3/4 of the way through the book, she actually, like when she starts figuring out her real identity, and she starts thinking about her age and talking about her age, and then I realized, oh yeah, up to this point we haven't discussed that. I just kind of guessed, I guesstimated where she was at, and I hadn't thought too much on how old she really was. I think it's interesting, though, like the Banis places her as one of the 5 Rainers because she's not easily deceived, and yet it took her so long to figure out who she was.
Well, I don't know. See, I think it seemed like a long time to us, but then once she realizes who she is, then it's only been a few days since she arrived. Since she arrived at Hexwood, because she traveled all the way from Homeworld through all the portals with them, and then got there, and then it was only a couple of days until she was in the forest. But I guess it's not exactly clear when she stops thinking that she's Viren and starts thinking that she's Anne, which is the confusing part.
Which is the other thing, because the Banis is supposed to have extended, right, all this way, but nobody had an identity shift until they hit the wood, until they hit Hexwood Farm or the wood surrounding.
Well, that could be a proximity thing, like maybe it was able to reach all the way out there to draw them in, but it couldn't really start running its scenarios until they were nearby it.
There you go. That makes sense. Yeah, I spent a lot of time trying to make the connections between the characters' multiple identities as we discovered them, because so the book hops around where, you know, one scene, I don't know, like Hume, one scene he's 5 and one scene he's 12 and the next scene he's 10 and the next scene he's, I don't know, a young man, and like so you come in at all these different points. And so the same thing happens with everybody else. And so you get these bits of information about who people are, and you get bits like from the outside world versus in the wood and in the farm. So I was trying to make all these connections between like, oh, okay, I know this person is this person, and you put them together, and how's this going to work out? How were you on figuring out exactly who everybody was? Were there any conclusions? Like you said, Merlin you thought was going to be Mordian, but like other than that?
No, well, when Raynor 2 thought her name was Morgan Latray, I was like, okay, well, she's bad. That like proves it. She's a bad person. But other than that, that was like the only one I knew for sure. I had an inkling that Artigal would end up being Arthur, but I thought his character in general seemed a bit too convenient because he's not really in the story at all until the end when they all meet in the wood and he's suddenly one of the new Raynors. I think he's mentioned a few times as like he has a roving band of knights out in the wood and everyone at the castle is so afraid of them, but he doesn't, he shows up at the end, and then after like 2 pages of him being there, all of a sudden he's King Arthur.
Yes. Yeah, I did. I kept thinking, like, as I was going through, who is this Artigal person they keep talking about? Mm-hmm. And then, yeah, you don't get him till the end. There are so many characters in this book. So many characters. I just was like, okay, I'm only going to list the most important ones, and that still was like 25 people. I didn't even, like there were several controller this and governor that kind of, I felt like, okay, well, they're extra, we don't need to worry about them. But it was a little confusing to figure out some of them, but it was kind of nice when it did wrap up, it did all fit neatly. I didn't feel like anybody was lost or that the connections didn't make sense.
No, the only thing was that I expected Sir John Bedford, who was in charge of like a regional office for, so this intergalactic federation thing that operates on Earth is, well, and throughout the universe, is called Raynor Hexwood Industries or something. They have like some made-up name for it. But he's in charge of like the regional office, and so when Mordion, who is the servant of the Raynors and one of the other Raynors, when they come to see why everyone is disappearing into the forest, they talk to him, and he seems like he knows a lot and he's a good person, and then he gets sucked into the Banisfield too and thinks he's a knight, and then at the end he's like helping out with all this stuff, and I was sure that he was going to end up being one of the new Raynors, but then it turned out he was just himself and he was just going to keep being his little regional whatever. So I was a little disappointed with that because I liked his character, and I think I might have preferred it if he was the 5th Raynor instead of Martin.
Yeah, that might would have been good. I didn't feel like he was too short shifted. It made sense that they needed somebody who knew what they were doing to straighten things out on Earth, and they made the comments towards the end, like once he gets this fixed, then we need to promote him to head of the Albion office, which is one of the bigger, more important offices. So I don't know. I guess I didn't think he got too much of the shaft, but
That's true.
But he was a good character, and he's very sort of British, like that comes through very much. Which I guess we should say, like Hexwood Farms and all of that is like outside of London. So I thought it was interesting. I don't know. I didn't look up. Is Diana Wynne Jones British? Is she?
She was. She passed away a couple of years.
Oh, sadly.
2011 maybe. So it was a few years ago.
She there's lots of little phrases. It's not excessively British language, but there's lots of little phrases and things, occasional vocabulary here or there that is very British, I think, which is fun when you're reading the book.
Yeah. So while we're talking about characters, I didn't like Martin that much because I was confused at first. I didn't know if he was Anne's older brother or younger brother. And then when it turned out that he was her younger brother, I felt confused. But I think that goes back to me feeling weird about how old she was, because even from the beginning, she seemed like she was acting older than I expected her to be. And so, like, I went through the whole story just thinking that Martin was her little brother, and he's not really around too much until the big showdown at the castle with the dragons. And then all of a sudden he's there and he's like doing all this stuff, but he still didn't feel like super well developed to me. And then I guess I haven't read Beowulf before, so I wasn't familiar with his true self.
I read it once, and it's been at least 15 years ago, if not a little bit longer. So and I'm gonna be honest, I don't remember loving it. And that might be different now. It's been a long time, but I feel like maybe you picked up on the age disconnection for Anne that I just missed, but it makes sense in terms of the book because she's really 21, isn't she? Mm-hmm. At that, like in the end or in real life, she's 21, and so it would make sense for her to be acting a little bit older than the Banis has projected her to be. But yeah, I felt like it was interesting at the end. We find out that Martin was Patella, who was supposed to be this great hunter, great warrior, but he really doesn't do anything of that nature in the book. Like he comes, he presents warnings. He doesn't really join in the fight. He doesn't,
mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I noticed too. And I think what stood out to me about Anne was when she met Mordion. So up until this point, I thought, because she had been sick and in bed, home from school, and so I thought maybe she was like 10 or something. I had no idea how old she was, so I just started out thinking she was 10. But then she meets Mordion, and I guess it was like her internal thoughts and her like sense of self-preservation at this strange man that made me confused and thought that she was older than she seemed to be.
I think the other interesting thing is there's a point that Hume asks her, at one of the points when Hume is older, he asks her, why is it that you always seem the same age? Mm-hmm. He's like, I get older, but you don't. And I guess, doesn't really want to explain, like, well, sometimes you're younger and sometimes you're older and sometimes you go back and forth. She's just like, well, time just works differently when you're not here.
Yeah.
So that kind of throws off to the idea that her age has varied. Because at the end, it makes it seem like she's not been exactly the same age the whole time.
Well, and do you think that that's because, so Orm Pender, when he took over, he trapped Merlin and Arthur in the Stas, like the frozen whatever tank, and we assume that they've been there for hundreds and hundreds of years, ever since he locked away the Banis. And so maybe that's why they have more changes than Anne, who's only been there a few days, ever since Viren and Rainer's 1 and 2 arrived.
That makes sense. Okay, but so here you go. There's 3 people that are in Stas sleep. So there's Arthur and Merlin, but Martin was the other one. And if I remember right, Martin is still a boy at the end. When the Banis informs them that Martin is going to be the 5th Rainer, I think he's still a kid. And in theory, he shouldn't be.
Yeah, well, I remember him saying something about he was still short, and that's why he thought why the Banis could make him believe that he was a kid or something.
Oh, okay. Maybe that was it.
I don't know. I know it went through a part when everyone was recognizing each other for who they really were. Like, it gave physical
Descriptions.
What did you think of the voices thing?
Oh, yes. I kept waiting for that to come about. So I guess, yeah. So Anne thinks when she thinks she's Anne, she has 4 voices that she hears in her head, and they have different identities. And she doesn't know their names, but she calls them the king, the boy, the prisoner, and the slave. Mm-hmm. And you don't kind of figure that all out to the end, but apparently that's part of the Rainer's thing, is that you can hear voices. It's a special trait. And then you find out that really what it is the ability of them to communicate with each other across distance and time. So then you have to figure out who they all are. So right at the very end, you get to figure out who is each of the people, right? Mm-hmm. Which I thought the king and the slave were pretty obvious. The king was, well, and the boy. The king was Arthur, or Sir Artegel. And then I have to look at my cheat sheet of names. And then the slave was Mordion, mm-hmm. right? Because he's been the Rainer's servant, and he was made to do that against his will. Right. And then the boy was Hume, mm-hmm. right? Because he was always like a boy in the Banis. He always was a boy. But the prisoner was the one that I didn't. No, I mixed that up. Hume was the prisoner. Oh, I don't know. Those 2 were harder for me, the prisoner and the boy. And one of them was Hume and one of them was Martin. And now let me look.
Yeah, prisoner.
Yeah, prisoner. It was trickier.
Yeah, it does say Martin had a graze on his face, but now he was very short. He was very about Viren's height and slightly bow-legged, and he was older too. He seemed to be only slightly younger than Viren, and as brown and weather-beaten as Hume. Okay. So he did age at the end when.
Okay, and he was the prisoner because he was in one of the Stas boxes as well. Is that right? Anyways, I thought it was interesting to finally be able to put all the right people together with the right voices. And throughout the book, you get bits of their character, you know, like it's always describing how Anne feels that they are, how they talk to her. The king is always bored about certain things and looking for entertainment. And the slave is always reticent to share his perspective, which kind of fits with their personalities. So I thought that was really, really great. But like I said, it was harder for me to grasp the other two. And I think part of that was like Martin, you don't get much of that development, so it's harder to connect him. So.
Yeah, and the Banis says when, after like everything is announced, says that like that bond they all share and being able to meet all in person now is going to make them like really successful during their 10 years. Because they obviously they know about all the corruption and everything that happened during the previous I guess 1,000 years that the other reigners had been in charge. And so they had their work cut out for them.
Yes, it was a big task, which it talks about as they were traveling back. That was kind of the overwhelming thing, is they're all thinking about like, first of all, we just realized who we are. Second of all, we just got these new roles. And third, like, oh my goodness, the future that is coming. So it's kind of big. What did you think about like Mordian heard these voices of the other ones, and you get a really good description of that. And Anne or Varian, you heard the same thing. What did you think of like how they recognized each other in real life, but neither one of them would ask the other one because they're afraid to hear, like to admit that they heard voices?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting, and I mean, they're two of the main characters, and I felt like those two characters were the most fleshed out of anybody. And so I think that's partially why I was so surprised at the end when they just turned out to be themselves. But maybe that's why there was so much more put into them, because they didn't already have an existing like framework of legends or anything like that to build on. But I liked both of them very much. What did you think about Mordion's childhood? That was the part that reminded me of Fringe. If you haven't seen that show, there's like these scientists, they're like doing all these experiments on kids with like special powers, and it reminded me of that very much.
No, I haven't seen that one. I felt like it explained a lot. You know, from at least halfway through the book that Mordion has been put through some sort of training, and that a lot of what he does is against his will. It's something that he's forced to do in a compelling sort of way, like he has to act on orders. And so there's a certain amount of things that he does that you find forgivable, or at least you put the blame not on him, but on the people that are, you know, the reigners that are commanding him. But now that you see his childhood and sort of the abuse that he's gone through, and the, you know, all the misery and pain that he's gone through, then I feel like you realize even more what he's had to overcome to retain any sort of humanity, you know? And I think it helps explain too, Viren first as Anne, like she goes through these periods where she is okay with Mordion, and then she hates him, and then she's okay with him, and then she hates him. And then when she realizes she's Viren and she realizes who he is, nothing to do with him anymore because, you know, he's an assassin. But when she finally puts together who he really is, you know, being the slave and being what he's been through, then even she's able to put that behind her, you know, and is looking to say, how can I help him and be a strength to him in the future? So I think it goes a lot in the way of saying, like, you don't know where people come from, what they've gone through, you know?
Yeah, I really liked that part of their relationship also. And so I think I said before, but they were both from Homeworld. And since Mordion was the Rainer's servant, he worked there at the House of Balance, and Viren worked there in like the wardrobe. So when people would go out on missions, she would give them Earth clothes or clothes from whatever planet they were going to so that they could blend in. And so when he was doing his missions, he would go down there and she would give him clothes. And as like their friendship kind of blossomed, then she like gave him the ugliest clothes, like as a dare, and he did it. I thought that was really funny.
Yes. Well, it's like that seems to be the thing he recognized in her as well, was like her sense of humor and her attitude, I guess. Like she's a bit more daring. And she doesn't realize until it gets towards the end and she realizes she's Viren and she's in the Banis, and then she's in as much trouble as she's in. She doesn't realize that what she's thought of as sort of not a big deal before in her previous life is really a big deal, you know. But she's kind of given him the strength through all these years to kind of fight back, because she's had this sort of nonchalant attitude about it all.
I agree.
Yeah, so you kind of have this hope that they'll, you know, be there for each other and they'll work it out.
Yeah. So something else I wanted to mention about the setting. So this book was written in 1993, I think, and in one section of the book, the Rainers are watching like a video of what's been going on, and the technology they used was funny to me. It's like some kind of little video cube that like puts out little holograms onto this little table or something, but they still, like when they're watching it, they still have to like fast forward and rewind, which seemed really funny to me because they're so bored and they're like falling asleep while it's fast forwarding to the part that they want to see. And that was just funny to me that like so much crazy stuff is happening in this book, but like her idea of like this futuristic technology just seemed really kind of quaint to me.
Yes. Well, I think that happens in science fiction. Science fiction is probably not my favorite genre, but I've read several different books, and some of them you read and they have a really advanced sort of idea of the technology, and then some of them you read and it's like this where maybe it's a little lacking in creativity. It's a little bit, you know, just a little update over what there is right now. I felt like she had a very advanced idea as far as the space travel went. How they have, what did she call them? They're not tunnels. She called them
Portals.
Portals, yes. But they weren't portals as in you walk through it and you instantly appear in the place you want to be. It's a portal and you still have to walk through it. And it's like a tunnel to the next place, but it shortens all the distances. And you have to make certain connections, kind of like if you're connecting flights to get to your final destination. But the description's pretty cool, and they have to calibrate the portals to the exact location you want to end at. And so that I thought was a different approach. You know, it wasn't, here's your spaceship. It was a little bit different. So that was cool. But it was, yeah, her videos were maybe not not as cool. It makes me think of, I don't know, did you ever read Ender's Game?
No, I haven't read it.
Ender's Game was, it started as a short story, and then he published it as a short story, and then later developed it into the novel. And I have to look it up now to tell you exactly how many years ago it was, but several years ago. And before we were all walking around with iPads and everything. But if you go back and read it now, and you look at the form of communication and the training that the kids were doing when they would go off, it's like he talks about they have their own little like communicators, and they really are like little iPads. Like when you look at it, and they get their instructions on the screen, and they do all the games and everything on the screen, and it's all touch screen, everything. And it was way before that was a thing, and when I read stuff like that, I think, okay, well, he was ahead of the curve there. He was really thinking ahead. So.
Yeah, I think that's the funny thing, is that everyone has like all these ideas of what it could be like, but if anybody's right, it's only a few people, or only about a few things. So that's interesting. I don't know, if I probably wouldn't write a science fiction book. I don't think I'd be able to think up inventions that sounded plausible enough for me to like put out there.
It's definitely outside of my area. I thought this was overall really well done for a science fiction book, though. It really is not a traditional, it's really not a traditional science fiction book. And I was trying to explain that to somebody this week. It was like, well, it's sci-fi and fantasy all mushed up, and a little bit different.
Yeah, I don't really know how she did it. I was reading about Diana Wynne Jones, though, and she originally got started writing in the 60s. She was at home with her 3 young boys, and she needed a way to preserve her sanity, so she started writing books.
I think that's been a thing for more than one author.
I find it very relatable.
All right, so one of these days we're going to be doing one of your books, right?
You'll be the first to know.
All right. I expect. I expect. All right. Well, yeah, I feel like, do we cover we can't cover every character, but I feel like we got most of them.
Yep, that's all I've got in my notes.
All right. So, do you think it was worth it?
I think it was worth it. I'm glad that it wasn't like a super long book, because you have to have like a lot of stamina and commitment to go along with the crazy, like, non-linear storyline. And I don't know how she put all that all together, because I honestly was not expecting, when I got to the end, I was like, there's no way that all these things can fit together, because they make no sense. But somehow they did.
Yeah, she definitely had to do some organization ahead of time, some serious outlining, I think, to make sure that it all fit together well, because it does come together really well.
One last thing, the Great Forest thing.
Oh yeah.
Did that seem out of place to you?
I thought it was a trick the Banis was playing.
Yeah.
I didn't think it was going to be legit.
Mm-hmm.
But I guess it is.
Yeah, that's what I felt like too, because at the end everyone's trying to leave, and Mordion gets out for some reason. And then he realizes what happened, and he goes back into the forest, and everyone else is there. The Banis is freaking out, like running around in circles, and then it like realizes what's going on and explains to everybody what they have to do. And I think that was the only part to me that didn't make a whole lot of sense. Like the part about the Banis let everyone think that the forest's theta space was its theta space, and that was useful to it. But I guess I don't know, it's never explained very clearly at the beginning. You just kind of think that the theta space is that size, but you don't know that it's coming from the forest. You think it's coming from the Banis, but then it turns out that they both have one, and that was a lot to wrap my mind around.
Yes. Like I said, I thought it was a trick before, because the Banis has gotten kind of sneaky and it's learned to be deceptive. Got like a little, I don't know, AI gone awry thing going on here. And he tries to explain that the wood and the forest has its own theta space, and that's why the disconnection with time, the fact that nothing is going in order in time, and that's why that happens. And I thought, well, that's rather convenient. You're just saying that. So I really thought that was completely just something he was throwing in there, and that it was going to end up being another trick the Banis was playing until Mordian couldn't leave. And then they had to create the theta space, and then they really could leave. Mm-hmm. But I did think it lends itself a little bit to I think with a lot of British mythology and history, there's magic to the woods and to the forests. And after they create the theta space, they see sort of, what do they see? They see like a unicorn flip by, and they see a satyr and a couple other things, like as they're trying to leave. And I think it lends itself to the magic of the forest. Mm-hmm. So, but it was a little odd.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me. I think that's probably what it is.
I think I'm going to have to read it again now and see if it makes sense the second time through.
Yeah. Well, if we don't have anything else on this book, do you want to go ahead and tell us about next month's pick?
Sure. So I wanted to, for a long time, explore the Arthurian legends, and it seems like the perfect time to do that, so that maybe you can make a few more connections between what we just read and maybe some of the background that might have come from or been pulled into that. I thought about Beowulf too, but I couldn't quite convince myself I wanted to do that again just yet. So there's several things, and the Arthurian legends, there's not one original book. It comes down from different tales, and the first written versions are in Welsh in like the 1200s, and I can't read Welsh. And then there's French and German, and anyway, so it all comes down. And I thought about reading one of the older versions, but it appears that T.H. White's Once and Future King was pretty heavily influenced by some of the original romantic versions of the Arthurian legends. So we're going to go with that. So T.H. White, The Once and Future King, written in 1958. We're going to do that. And I believe it's part of a trilogy. So if you get really excited and have extra time, you could dive into more.
Is the whole trilogy contained in the Once and Future King? I think that's what I read.
I'll have to go look again.
That might not be right, but we'll have to see. But anyway.
I will double check. I thought it was the first, but I could have that wrong. So I'll go check and then post it appropriately.
Mm-hmm.
I did think it was interesting, and I'll just pass this on. We have this, like, Neil Gaiman sneaks into our discussions all the time, and we commented that the Diana Wynne Jones Hexwood was dedicated to Neil Gaiman because of some hints he gave her as far as plot twists. So I was reading about the Once and Future King, and Neil Gaiman was asked about how a graphic novel character that he developed and Dumbledore were very similar from the Harry Potter books. Mm-hmm. And wondered, were one of them borrowing from the other? And he said, quote, "I thought we were both just stealing from T.H. White." So I thought that would be interesting, to keep that in mind as well. And if anybody's interested, the character there is Timothy Hunter, and it's from DC Comics, the Book of Magic. Neil Gaiman helped on that. So, but apparently they were all stealing from T.H. White. So maybe we'll get to make some fun Harry Potter and Neil Gaiman connections again there.
Yeah, that would be awesome. So I'm really excited to read this because I've actually read the first part of it a long time ago when I was a teenager. I don't remember how far I got. I'm pretty sure I had to take it back to the library before I got too far. But I remember liking it very much. It had a really good writing style, and there's a lot of humor in it. So it should be a really good read.
Well, I'm excited. I wanted to read it for a while. It's been on my list. And anyways, it seems like a perfect opportunity. So here we go.
Sounds awesome. So I posted earlier that we had something to premiere, brand new theme a little later on. We have a theme song and a little intro and everything. And so we are going to figure out how we want to use that, and we would love feedback if anyone has any to share. So do you have anything else, Lisa?
Nope, that's it.
All right. Well, thanks for joining us. This episode was our 6th episode, so that was a super exciting milestone. And we will see you next time.